my vision is, like you say, a very positive one. I don't believe that AI is only a horrible corporate tool to exploit human creativity. So for people who are worried about the commercial aspect of AI displacing humans and making money or making it difficult for human artists to make a living, the real issue, again, to me, is about why are we equating what sells with what is artistically worthwhile.
This might be one of the most contentious videos I have uploaded to my channel. Now, AI is one of those topics that makes people incredibly frustrated and angry and often incredibly uncomfortable, especially in the book community. I have literally seen people on Twitter, BookTok and YouTube go on crazy witch hunts against authors and other creators because there's been allegations that they are using AI. But I always think it is good for us to challenge ourselves a bit. And when I saw that one of my favorite authors of all time, the author of the Dandelion Dynasty and also more recently All That We See and Seem, came out and he basically said that he was quite optimistic about AI not being used generally but within the creative field, I knew I had to have a chat with him just to understand his perspective. Now obviously these are his viewpoints. Throughout this interview doesn't mean that I condemn or condone them, but I also just think it's important as a book community that we learn to talk about AI, because I do not think that AI is going to go anywhere. Now just a couple of things. During this interview I actually had a really bad flu, so I might be looking a bit serious for most of it. And also if you notice that my eyes go to the right quite often, it's simply because my monitor is here and my camera is here, and I was looking at the camera when I was talking to Ken Liu, but then I was constantly checking if everything was recording okay, and that's why my eyes keep going to the right. Well, let's skip the introductions and jump straight into the interview. I'm really excited about today's conversation because, as you probably are aware, the book community has been, is quite sensitive when it comes to speaking about AI. But I found it really intriguing that as you just had a new book release, which I'm going to allow you to talk about just a bit, you've been quite open about, some of the drawbacks, but also some of the potential benefits, creatives could have of using AI. So I'm really excited to jump into the conversation. But today is the 14th of October, and I would love to give you a couple of minutes just to talk about what this book is about and why people should go out and buy it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you. So today is the publication day for the US edition of All That We See or Seem. The UK edition is already out. So this is a techno-thriller. It's a new book featuring an entirely new world and a new heroine that I'm writing about. Um, All That We See or Seem is a techno-thriller about a hacker, Julia Z, and her attempts to track down and rescue an artist who uses AI in her work. And along the way, it's really a book that meditates on what is the future of human art in an age of AI? Are there ethical ways to use AI? Are there ethical ways to think about data? How do we figure out who we are and remain human in this day and age where so much of the data seems to be twisted and used against us? So a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today are concerns that I first had when I was writing the book. So, if you're interested in the topic we're talking about today, I hope you'll pick up the book. I think it's there's a lot of resonances.
Absolutely. So I read it, and it's one of the most unique books I've ever read, and it's incredibly fascinating. It definitely it feels realistic in some scary ways. So if you like techno thrillers, I definitely would recommend it.
Thank you.
So Ken, the book community has become incredibly sensitive to the use of AI, with many authors and even publishers taking really firm anti-AI stances against it. But you're one of the very few authors I've come across that is openly discussing the creative potential AI could bring. So I suppose my first question is just, why haven't you taken a firm anti-AI stance, and what potential benefits do you see AI offering creatives?
Yeah, number one, I'm pretty much opposed to binary thinking because I think most questions and issues are much more nuanced than slogans would, indicate. I think when we're talking about AI, we have to sort of distinguish between multiple different kinds of questions. There's the question of what sort of AI are we really against or for? What does that even mean, right? There are many different kinds of AI we're talking about here. There's the kind that's trained by large corporations for profit, involving using books that are pirated or that have whose authors have not given consent, right? That's one extreme. The other kind would be something trained by individuals on works that they specifically sourced, either that they composed on their own or that they have acquired through legal means in order to conduct research. These are very different things. So when we say we're anti-AI, it seems to me that position just doesn't make any sense because different kinds of AI require different kinds of treatment. We also have to distinguish between different kinds of uses. It seems to me that AI uses that are about displacing humans and lying to the public, pretending that you've made something when you've used the machine to do it. That's one version, one extreme. The other version would be you disclosing exactly what it is you're doing, and you're not trying to displace humans. In fact, you're trying to see if there are things you can do that would not otherwise be possible. That seems to be a very different kind of case. And it doesn't seem to me that treating them the same makes a lot of sense. Further, we also have to think about what it is we're really worried about. Are we worried about the quality of art, or are we worried about who gets to make money from art? These are two different types of questions, and they should not be conflated into the same kind of thing. And further, a lot of times I hear these discussions about AI centered around copyright. What is copyrightable versus what is morally and ethically something that we want to defend are, again, two entirely different things. Now, there may be some overlap here and there, but for the most part, these are different questions with different considerations. So for all of those reasons, I don't find the performative stance about AI really helpful on either side. Either the position that art is dead and machines will do better art than humans. That position doesn't make any sense to me. Nor does the position of we're not going to use AI. We'll just plug up our ears and shout and scream, and AI will just go away. I don't think that position makes a lot of sense either.
Yeah.
So this is a very long-winded way to say that what really matters here are the details, the nuances, and we should think about those. And maybe now's the time to turn to those and sort of dissect some of these questions in depth.
But I suppose my follow-up question would then be, especially when we talk about books and being creative, there's a lot of creative people that feel really threatened by the use of AI. A lot of people say it devalues human labor and it floods the market with imitation art and just makes art, basically feel worthless. So I suppose my question would be, for those who are anxious about AI replacing, the artist or the creative field, how do you think we can protect human artists while still being able to use AI? What does that look like?
Great question. So for people who are anxious about AI, this is sort of how I think about it. I mean, I go through my own anxieties, but here's the thought process that'll work for me. Now, it may not work for everybody, but I'll lay it out, and perhaps it will be interesting at least to think about it. So when we're concerned about AI displacing human craft, it's fear of competition of a sort, right? Fear of competition. And this is a fear that is based on, we have to sort of examine this fear very closely to see what it's actually about. And it seems to me that there are multiple forms of this fear. One of them is artistic based, the other is market based, and they're not necessarily the same thing, right? So what do I really mean by that? Let me dig into it a little bit. The fear on the art side is more like what we do is valuable. As artists, what we do is inherently valuable, independent of money. Even if people were to pay no money for what we do is still valuable. And there's something about AI hurting us when AI produces stuff that's like art but really isn't art. I think there's a moral dimension here, which is we as human beings feel debased when machines produce something and people give their attention or praise to a machine's production, which has no inherent meaning over what our human produced art. And our human produced art has inherent meaning, and there's an inherent human dignity to it. So this is related to the concept of moral rights in copyright, in European copyright law. There's something morally debasing about machines taking what we do and then imitating, producing cheap copies and throwing back at us, right? So that's one part of it. The other part of it is market based, and this one is more about we do what we do and we make a living from it, and then machines will produce cheap copies and steal our money, take away our audience so that we can no longer survive. This is more about the fact that we have chosen as a society to support artists in this manner via the market. So this is a much more Marxist economics-based kind of fear, which I will address separately. Okay, so having laid out those two pieces of it, let me talk about why I'm not particularly worried. If you go onto YouTube right now and you search for AI and novels and AI and writing, you'll find thousands of videos by creators that purport to teach you how to use AI to write your novel. It's sort of like, oh, this is so cool. Like, you can, if you ever wanted to write a novel and you just didn't know how, or you didn't think you have the book in you, well, no, hey, AI can help you. You have an idea, they'll teach you how to get ChatGPT to write the novel for you. Yay, awesome. There's like thousands of videos like that, and they're pretty popular. So it seems that at least some people are watching them. But I want you to also search for a different kind of video, which is a video in which somebody said, I'm a booktuber, I read books. And I have recently found this AI written book, which I think is the most awesome book in the whole world. It's better than Brandon Sanderson, it's way better than Ken Liu, whatever that guy did. This is the best book ever, and everyone should read it. You will not find a single book like that, not even one. Okay, you can't find it. They don't exist. So what does that tell me? It tells me that, at least as of now, humans are fundamentally not interested in reading AI written books or looking at AI produced art. I think this is true for a lot of you, if you just sort of think about it. If you're fearful about AI replacing you, do you think you would go and read an AI written book? And I think your answer will be one of two, right? One is no, never, because my time is limited. Why would I waste time reading an AI written book when I can when there are more human written books than I can even, read? So if you're an artist and your own instinct reaction is you would not read AI written art, then why do you fear other humans will do so, right? I mean, it seems to me that if you think your taste is good enough that you would not want to read machine written art, why do you think that your audience is so bad in taste that they will go read machine written art? If you think your readers are at least, at your level of taste, then it just seems to me irrational to be fearful of that audience going to read AI written art. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, of course, the alternative is maybe I will want to read AI written work because I think AI has actually acquired consciousness and is an independent author in the same way that we humans are. Now, that position I can respect. And in fact, I sort of suspect that it might be true in the future. Today's AI is not conscious, but that doesn't mean that it will always be unconscious. If you read the research in the field, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of confusion, a lot of just pure we don't know about where AI is going. The fact that these neural networks have done so much in so little time is already surprising to people who are working the field. As someone who studied AI extensively, this is surprising. How far we've gotten is surprising, and there are really wonderful research being done revealing the ways in which even these primitive neural networks have representations of data, of knowledge in a way that's very similar to the way our brains represent things. So there's no reason for you to categorically rule out the possibility that AI will not in the future acquire consciousness and have an intent to generate meaning, right? I think anybody who says, "Oh, this is nonsense," all AI is doing is compressing, data on the internet and showing you sort of this fuzzy re-representation of what you've done. Yeah, that's true, but that does not mean that there's a categorical theoretical obstacle towards AI being conscious and being meaning making, having a meaning making capacity in the future. So, in the future, if AI were to write books from that meaning making capacity, I would definitely read it, and I would certainly be happy to welcome the chance to compete in the same marketplace of ideas with that kind of consciousness because they're just like us. There will be no difference. So either perspective, it just seems to me there's nothing to worry about. Either AI will be meaningful and therefore worth reading, or it's not meaningful and no one will be interested in reading. Okay, now some of the people listening will say, okay, that's sort of a very naive stance. I mean, what makes you think readers will care about whether there's meaning or not? Readers may just want to be entertained. And if AI writes books, cheap, crappy books that are entertaining, why wouldn't people read them and not read humans? Well, then my answer is, to me, if the readers you're worried about are readers so easily distracted by cheap entertainment, why do you want their praise and attention at all? If these readers are so easily distracted by crappy books, as you put them, then it seems to me that you should not be excited about having their support in the first place. If you are happy to have their money, realizing that their taste is terrible, then it seems to say more about you as an artist, does it not? I mean, to me as an artist, I don't care about the attention of people who prefer crappy art. I'm here to produce good stuff. And if people want to support me, it's because they think what I do is good. If they're easily distracted by a copy of me that has no meaning, that is cheap, that does not have an individual meaning making view of the universe, then it doesn't really seem to me that I care about their supporting that in that case. Does it not? I mean, it just seems to me that either the people I care about will still want to read human written and crafted art, or if they're so easily distracted by inferior stuff, then they're just not audiences worth fighting for, right? Either case, I don't think we care. Now, to go back to the question of what about the fact that assuming that I'm right and a lot of people who are supporting artists are only interested in being entertained, and the fact that AI may actually flood the marketplace with cheap entertaining art such that people will no longer support the real human artists. It seems to me that part of the problem here is not so much that um, humans are being outcompeted by AI, but rather the fundamental model of supporting artists by selling work is flawed, right? I mean, Ursula K. Le Guin has said this many times. When you choose to support artists in the marketplace, you are inherently debasing art in some way because you have made what will sell equivalent to what is artistically worthwhile, right? You've made an equation between those two. That inherently might be a problem. And I feel that just by equating what is best selling with what is great art, we've already gone down the route of not doing a great job of supporting artists. So maybe the solution to the problem of artists, trying to compete in a marketplace filled with cheap entertaining products that people are gravitating towards, is to support artists directly, not by forcing them to compete in the market. Now, this may be a radical proposal, but I think we should re-examine the assumption that artists should be supported by the marketplace and that what sells is automatically equivalent to what is artistically worthwhile. I think that's a conversation we should have, and that's a more interesting question.
Well, there's a lot in there, and I'm not even sure where to go from that. But I suppose you mentioned that no one wants to read AI written books. I've actually read a couple for a video. They were really, really bad, and absolutely atrocious. So I would not recommend them. But I think one area we at the moment kind of see AI, taking more and more active part in publishing and the book community is, for example, when it comes to illustrations. It's really, really hard for the average person to know if a cover is made by an illustrator or if it's AI generated or partially AI generated, unless if they look it up online or, ask the author or whatnot. So would you not say that at least we already have some evidence that AI is potentially taking over creative jobs?
That's a great point. And I don't have a simple answer for this, but I would ask you to sort of think about why are some forms of art more vulnerable to AI displacement or machine displacement than others, and what does that say about, again, how we choose to support artists, right? So the way I would think about this is to go back to the last big technological revolution, which is the invention of the camera, right? One of the things that we sort of you know talk about in our narrative about the history of art is this idea that at some point the invention of the camera took away jobs from portrait painters. Now
Mm.
that's actually not true at all. That is not historically accurate. The invention of the camera did change the visual arts significantly and did push visual artists to do their work differently, but not in the way most people understand it. Um, Fundamentally, to simplify a very complicated story, the camera did not cause a lot of visual artists to lose their jobs, except in one specific category, and that is a category of visual artists that we don't even think about anymore. I'm talking about engravers. So one of the things that engraving as a form of art existed originally as a kind of handmaiden to the other visual arts. So in the days prior to photographic reproduction, if you wanted to print a painting, right, a famous painting, say the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper, in a book, you have to create an engraving of it first. An engraver has to actually translate the painting into a printing plate before you can produce printed reproductions of it. Engravers are, an important um, part of the artistic community, and they were independent artists. They had to do this very, very difficult work of translating a piece of art from one form into another, right, into another medium. And there was a huge amount of skill in what they did. And a lot of people knew famous works of art only through engravings. Now, photographic reproductions, on the other hand, basically use photos to produce printing plates. This became an art form. This became a mechanical way of producing printable forms of art very quickly. And within basically a generation, engravers were put out of business. They no longer had their jobs. Um, and I think their position is somewhat similar to illustrators or translators today. And it's worthwhile to think about, why are these art forms in particular under threat? I
Mm.
don't have a good answer for you other than, sort of look back historically at why engravers lost their jobs to photo reproduction. And the answer sometimes could be summarized by, what is the highest um, praise you can give to an engraving? The highest praise you can give to an engraving is it captured the original in some sense, right? So I think some of the theoreticians of art sort of spoke about this as, if the highest ideal of your art is its ability to reproduce the original in a different medium, then it seems to us that your art form is constantly under threat of mechanical displacement, because the highest ideal of your art is confined and limited by the original in some other medium. And I think that explains why engraving, there's a reason I spoke of engraving as a form of translation, because if your way of judging an engraving is how well does it capture the original, and if your way of judging a translation is how well does it reproduce some ideal of the original, then maybe these art forms are subject to displacement, because the way you judge them is so limited. Your judgment of them is an optimization problem. And as we know, AI is incredibly good at solving problems that are about minimizing loss or optimization problems. But I want to sort of say that that's not the only way to judge an art form, right? If your judgment of an art form like engraving or translation is not how well does it reproduce an original, but does it allow you to see the original in a new way? Is there some way you can do the interpretation so that a new truth emerges? And I think we do see that in some engravings. There are some engravings where we sort of view them as independent pieces of art better than the original, or we judge them at least not by how well they reproduce some original. And there are translations where we judge them in the same way. Has a new meaning been excavated rather than does it in some way capture the original, which is actually a nonsensical criterion. It just never works. So to go back to your illustration example, do we view illustrations as a way to somehow fulfill the ideal of the original they're illustrating? Is this merely about bringing forth some sort of visualization of what is actually in the text already? Or is it about something more? Are illustrations about elevating the original or excavating some meaning that's not in the original? I think that's the distinction. In one form, you can see how it can be subject to risk, to mechanization displacement. And the other form, it's not. But again, I would sort of go back and ask the question, if our concern is, what is our concern here? Is our concern about displacement of human art? In the moral sense. Well, if we're concerned about moral sense or in the sense of human dignity, then the issue isn't the technology, but rather why are we putting market pressure so that the use of that technology is encouraged? It seems to me that we ought to look closer at what is the real root of the problem. The real root of the problem often is not the machine, but rather the people behind the machine, the system by which artists are exploited and subjugated and forced to make their living in the marketplace. I think that's the real problem that we should sort of examine, rather than sort of focus on the fact that, artists have been able to make their living in this particular way, which is not ideal. And now there's a machine that threatens to displace this industry. But we should not take it as a given that the existing arrangement is somehow fair and proper in the first place. We should ask deeper questions about why we're doing things this way and why should we do things this way.
Fascinating. Definitely some new thoughts as well. I'm not really sure. I think the reason why a lot of people, especially in the creative field and book community, are so sensitive is probably because the 2025 reality of AI is that these big companies like OpenAI, they don't really seem to be caring for creators at all. And we know there's so many ethical issues. Most of the information that is being fed into ChatGPT is probably stolen, as you already mentioned, copyright issues and all these things. So I suppose my question is, do you think there is a way, like, can you create an ethically trained AI system that artists and creators could actually use and participate in a meaningful way?
That's an incredible question. I mean, one of the sort of speculations I have in the Julia Z books, in All That We See or Seem, is precisely trying to answer that question. And I think there are some fundamental principles we can sort of agree on, right? I think the fundamental principle of consent, of using AI to ingest data in a way that does not feel out of place to what our human intuition is. The idea of having control over data of training, the idea of being transparent about uses of AI. I think these are all examples of principles we can agree on as we sort of strive towards an ethical use of AI. So I think those are very interesting and deep, important questions. But before we sort of get into it, I sort of want to turn the discussion into a slightly different direction, which is, why are we even concerned about this, right? Like, if your fundamental point is AI is just dumb, it's just a plagiarism machine, what's the point of even talking about it, right? I think that's the part that I want to sort of address, which is, why are we even concerned about trying to make ethical AI? What exactly is this benefit that I claim could come to the creative industry, to creatives, or to human creativity, or to art? So here's what I would say. I would say that, if you look at current examples of AI produced art, whatever that is, they're not very promising, right? What we see are these ridiculous deepfake videos that seem to just lie to people about what's really happening. What we see are these cheap, garbagey. I mean, I'll tell you what my exposure to AI writing is. On a daily basis, I'm flooded with these pitches from scammers telling me that they're going to help me sell my books, and they write these elaborate paragraphs that make it seem like they've read my book,
Ken,
which of course. Right?
I also get those emails, and I'm not an author.
So right? You know what they are, and they're insane. They're just these are AI written bits of garbage, and I'm flooded by them. And so if this is all we see, right? If this is all we see, right? Why are we even worrying about what may seem, right? Why do we even care about what the future of AI art is? Okay, so here's where is an important point. I want you to think back to the origin of the last great technological medium. Well, actually, that's debatable. Okay, let's go back to think about one of the last great technological mediums, which is cinema, right? When motion picture cameras were first invented, the Lumiere brothers, who invented one of the first practical motion picture camera projection system, and they called it the cinematograph, meaning a machine that writes or captures motion, kine motion, right? Cinema. They envisioned this machine as basically a kind of scientific instrument to study motion. You can capture objects and people in motion, and then you can play them back to study them. They did not see any entertainment value to this device. They viewed it as merely an instrument invented to study motion. It took somebody named Georges Méliès, a stage magician, to see the potential of this machine. He thought, okay, well, this machine can capture motion and play it back.
Yeah.
Well, what if we use this machine to tell stories, to entertain people? So Méliès was, famous for creating some of the earliest science fiction films, From the Earth to the Moon, and so on. He and others like him took the motion picture camera and basically invented the entire grammar of cinema, right? We are so immersed in cinema today, in TikToks, in YouTubes, in Instagram stories, in movies, in TV shows. We no longer realize how revolutionary this form of storytelling is. With this machine, the motion picture camera, filmmakers have invented an entire new medium of dramatic storytelling, right? Cinema is truly revolutionary in a way that is impossible to conceive without the machine, right? With this machine, you can do things like montages, reaction shots, flashbacks, um, all kinds of storytelling techniques that are not possible on the stage. A motion picture, a film, is nothing like a stage play. It is an entirely new way of telling stories. And we are now so trained in the language and grammar of cinema that even our novels are written in a cinematic manner. Everything we do now, where we tell stories, is so inflected by cinema that we sort of forget how unusual it is. But go back and look at the earliest motion pictures, the earliest movies, if you will. They are not interesting. It's just a camera sitting in front of a stage. It's just, people leaving a factory. If you saw those, you would not be able to envision the potential future of cinema. You would not be able to envision Breaking Bad. You would not be able to envision The Last of Us. You would not be able to envision booktubes. You would not be able to envision TikTok reactions. You would not be able to envision all the means, all the ways in which we use the language of cinema to speak to each other, to tell stories. By looking at those earliest examples, you can't possibly imagine what they would become. That's my point here. My point here is by looking at today's crappy AI generated videos and the crappy AI generated emails and the crappy AI pretend novels, it is not possible to envision the future of AI really as an artistic medium. What I'm saying here is, unless we experiment and keep on trying and to develop, we will not be able to invent the equivalent to the language of cinema for the medium of AI. If and when we can do that, we will see new forms of art that are not even possible to envision today. That's what's exciting. That's why this is worth trying for. It's not interesting to have AI write a novel in the mode of Brandon Sanderson. That's dumb. That's not interesting. That's just lying. That's just, trying to steal someone's work, and it's cheap. It's no different than using a camera to take someone's picture and then painting over it and claim that you painted someone's portrait. This is lies. This is just, a very brief period of time, a blip when people couldn't figure out what to do with these machines and they're just using it to lie, to cheat. But that is not the full potential of the medium. I don't believe it. In the same way that cinema was about capturing motion and playing it back and inventing this entire new medium of art, I think AI is about capturing subjectivities and playing back subjectivities. Because what exactly is interesting about AI art, even today, right? As I mentioned earlier, people are incredibly interested in playing with AI, in making these videos. It's not watching videos from Sora that's interesting. It's making videos with Sora that's interesting. It's not reading a novel written by ChatGPT that's interesting. It's trying to get the AI to write a novel that's interesting. It's this act of playing with this artificial subjectivity, playing with the illusion of subjectivity, playing with the captured um, the sort of genie in a bottle, captured versions of subjectivity, these fractured, simulated, synthetic, compressed subjectivities that we're extracting from the training data, playing with them. That's what's interesting. So my intuition is that AI as a medium, if it's ever going to be interesting, will involve the playing with these subjectivities. And when we figure out how to play with these subjectivities in a way that is actually genuinely interesting and revolutionary, like a new form of art that couldn't be done before without AI, that's when we'll see the full potential of the medium. So the bottom line is, I don't particularly care about these, cheap, crappy uses of AI right now because they're just imitative. They're not interesting. The really interesting thing involves all of us experimenting, trying to figure out how to actually create interesting new forms of art using AI.
Fascinating. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost sounds like, you could envision a future where AI and human creativity can still coexist. So, human artists and creators will still be appreciated. And we could unlock new kinds of arts that we can't even imagine at the moment. Is that correct?
Absolutely, but I would just refine one of your points, which I think is important, which is when we speak about human and AI creating as in a collaboration, I actually don't think that's at all plausible in the modern environment, and it's not necessarily what I think about as a good future. Let me sort of tease that apart a little bit, because saying humans and AI collaborating is sort of like saying filmmakers and their cameras collaborate. Is that really true? I'm not sure that's actually true. I feel like filmmakers are not collaborating with their machines so much as they're just using them. And I think for me, that's kind of where I sort of draw the line. I think it is possible that AI will develop into a new medium of art, and humans will use neural networks and generative models and all of these things as part of their creative process of creating AI. I wouldn't necessarily say that's humans collaborating with AI per se, because I don't quite believe that AI has creativity in that deep sense. On the other hand, if we get to a future in which AI has its own separate consciousness, right, and AI is its own separate independent creative mind, then in that case, speaking of human AI collaboration makes more sense to me, because in that case, it really is about humans and these other non-human creatives actually working together. But Johan, you sort of brought up a really interesting point for me, which is, what if these AI models are sort of on the verge? They're not quite like traditional tools in the sense that you can't fully control them, because there's always some level of unpredictability to what they do. But they're not really consciousnesses, independent consciousness on the other hand either. So we're sort of in this in-between state. I still think really interesting art can be made, but it's not quite like humans are using AI just like a tool. But it's also not like AI is actually collaborating with humans as an equal partner. It's somewhere in between. What exactly is that? I haven't really thought about that, and I haven't really come up with a very reasonable way to think about it. I mean, now that you mentioned it, I think in All That We See or See, Julia's relationship with her personal AI is actually a little bit like that. Julia sort of acknowledges that her personal AI is not conscious, not independent, and yet at the same time, the little AI is in some way a reflection of her own subjectivity, a kind of version of herself. And there is a sense in which she's collaborating with versions of herself amplified. So, all that is to say that I don't fully have an answer, but my vision is, like you say, a very positive one. I don't believe that, AI is only a horrible corporate tool to exploit human creativity. I think there is a version of the world in which the full potential of AI unlocks human creativity, and we thrive on producing more interesting art rather than a world in which human creativity is choked off by AI and we no longer do what we love. I just don't think that dystopian vision is realistic because humans write and create and paint and sing not because of money. We have never historically done that only for money. Uh, Being an artist is one of the worst way to make a living. So even if there were no way to make a living, we will still do it because we're human. We will keep on being artists because it's part of being human. All of us make art as part of how we enact our humanity. That will never change. So for people who are worried about the commercial aspect of AI displacing humans and making money or making it difficult for human artists to make a living, the real issue, again, to me, is about why are we equating what sells with what is artistically worthwhile? That's the real question, and that's the real issue we should struggle with. Not just someone has trained a machine.
Thank you for that. Yeah, yeah. I don't even know how to respond because there's so much in there. But I think I'll ask this question then because I have like 5 questions in my head. But so I think you paint a quite an optimistic view of AI and what it could potentially bring to the creative field in the future. I think someone watching this video will probably be like, well, ChatGPT started really, overtaking everything 3 years ago, and we've seen AI encroaching lots of different parts of our lives, and a lot of people struggle to mention a lot of benefits at all for the creative field, which I know you already talked about a bit. So if someone now watches this video and is like, well, they're on board with your vision, wouldn't that still mean that then that creator might have to embrace AI, and wouldn't that come with lots of risk where AI actually could really start damaging the creative field and stuff like that? I mean,
Mm.
do you not see like there's an inherent risk of embracing AI, or do you just see eventually humans would get it right?
I see lots of risks of humans embracing AI, but they're not necessarily the risks that we talk about a lot. And I mean, there's a huge amount of terrible things that can happen when you use AI. So I think fundamentally, I have to sort of stress this point, right? Which is there are so many issues, ethical and otherwise, with AI that it's almost impossible to sort of talk about all of them all at the same time. So let's just assume that we can solve some of these problems easily, right? So right now, a lot of these commercial AIs are horrible machines. They are produced in unethical ways. They are not tuned to our own creative purposes. Rather, they're tuned towards the purposes of the companies to make profit. So let's assume, number one, that somehow we can solve all of these problems, and we're now working with ethical AI systems produced with proper consent, trained with creativity and amplification of human creativity in mind, and produced in a way that um, does not cause you to lose control of your data. Okay, so let's assume that all of these things are true somehow, right? We have ethical AI systems that we're working with. Even so, we have tons of risks that people really should be aware of. One is, um, are you using AI in a way to just make doing your job easier? That to me is a big, huge red flag because to me, interesting uses of AI involve pushing art in new directions, creating new forms of art, not merely doing what you already do cheaper and faster. That to me is a very commercially driven attitude towards AI and deeply flawed. The problem of doing that is if you use AI to help yourself write a novel, I think you're going to fall into the position of some popular authors who exploit other writers to basically write books for them. Right? There are some writers who are wildly successful who no longer write their own books. They're just a brand name, right? They have other writers write books for them, and they just sort of have an outline, whatever. That to me is the danger of writers or artists who rely on AI as a kind of assistant, right? The risk of that is you become more and more reliant on the machine to do the work for you. You offload your cognitive work onto the AI so that more and more you're no longer actually doing your own creative work, but rather just offloading the interesting parts and the difficult parts of your work onto a machine. That to me is not a good use of AI and not artistically interesting because again, it's sort of like somebody who is a portrait painter who decides to take a photograph of their subject and then paint over the photograph and pretend that they did all the work themselves. It's just I'm not sure that is artistically honest, and then I'm sure that is artistically interesting. That to me is just sort of lying to yourself. So the danger of AI using that case is really about you becoming reliant on the machine and becoming less human yourself, right? So over and over again, I tell people the danger of AI is not really it displacing humans. It's more that humans becoming more like machines themselves. If you become lazy and rely on the machine to take over your agency and your own creative work, then that is a real danger. It's the danger of you becoming reliant on machine and giving up your own role as an artist, someone who has to go into the collective unconscious, retrieve mythologies and symbols and bring them back, and then use words to say what cannot be said in words, and use paint to depict what cannot be depicted, and use sounds to invoke the music of the celestial spheres, which is not audible to mortal ears, right? That's what artists actually do. You have to actually do that. And if you displace that into a machine and let machines dream for you, then you've given up your own humanity. That's the real danger, right? So I always ask people when you're experimenting with AI, what are you really doing? Are you just trying to find ways to be lazy so that the machine does the work for you? Or are you actually pushing yourself to be more human, to explore and do things that you cannot do at all, except with the aid of the machine? Is the machine acting like a telescope or a microscope for you, allowing you to see things you can't otherwise see, allowing you to capture subjectivities and play with them in ways you cannot do otherwise, allowing you to excavate new meanings that you cannot do otherwise? Is it doing all of those things for you? In which case, I think great, because you're being more human with AI. But on the other hand, if you're just using AI to be lazy, I think you're being less human, and that's the real danger. The real danger is AI makes you less human, not not many of the other things people worry about.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I think most people would agree that there's a huge risk of AI making humans become almost less humans. I think my question is just, what evidence do you feel like you have that we're not heading in that direction, where we're just becoming less and less human? Because I think the vision you're painting is appealing in a lot of ways, but I think my rational mind is just like, well, but what is the evidence we'll actually end up in a place where AI is a net good thing for the creative industry?
Oh, it's a great question, Johan. Incredibly good question. I mean, so first of all, I want to just sort of set the stage by saying that, sometimes as creatives, when we argue about AI, we sort of neglect what the real benefits of AI actually are, which is vastly beyond the creative fields, right? I mean, so people have to realize the very same techniques that are being used to train these large language models, the very same techniques, the same architecture, have allowed AI to solve the protein folding problem. This is an incredible advance for human science. The fact that the problem of how do you design protein sequences to be of a specific shape? How do you predict the shape of a protein, of a sequence of amino acids? This was a problem that when I was in college was deemed computationally unsolvable. It's not something that realistically can be done by machines. But using largely the same techniques that we use in large language models, we have been able to solve this problem. That is the kind of real benefit and advance that AI has brought to mind, right? So, when you say sort of, well, AI is killing art, you got to keep in mind that the real benefit of AI is about curing all diseases, which we agree is a good thing. Um, Finding the cure for cancer, which we would agree is a good thing. And AI has genuinely been doing things to help in that. Or things like understanding how the brain works, understanding building more impressive brain computer interfaces. These are all things that AI and machine learning in general has made huge strides in, right? So again, as a creative person, you've got to think just outside of the narrow piece we're talking about here. It's not just art. Art is important, but it's only one piece. AI has done incredible things outside of it, and we're just beginning to see the benefit of it, right? So, but let's go back and think about art just for a minute. The reason why I'm so optimistic is because historically, over and over again, we have seen how humans have always managed to find interesting ways to make use of new technologies to make art. We have always been able to become more human. And the fear of machines and technology making us less human was ever present. And we have always found new ways of being human. Again, right, if you go back historically, even writing as a technology was feared because it would take over memory. It would make us less reliant on memory. It would make us stupider. It would make us think that we know something when we don't. It would make us think that we understand something when we don't. Because again, right, Johan, you and I are having this conversation. This is a much better way of understanding what I mean than if you just read one of my tweets. If you read one of my tweets and said, AI good, you would not understand what I meant. You would have your own idea of what you thought I meant, and that understanding is only true when we actually have a conversation and we have this exchange of ideas. So, in some sense, the fear of writing making us more stupid is true. We are more stupid when we rely only on writing and don't talk to each other. But would any of us agree and say that writing is a net harm to the human race? I don't think any of us would agree with that. I think we would say writing is a net benefit because, on the whole, it has made us smarter, it has made us more interesting, has made us more human. And the same thing is true of every technology since then: mass production, um, electrification, telegraphs, the
The
idea
calculator.
of yeah, every single thing. Historically, that has been said to be possibly a bad thing for us because it will make us less human. It will destroy existing knowledge modes, knowledge frameworks. It would destroy existing ways of doing things. Have in the long run turned out to be a net boon to our net humanity, our attempt to understand the universe, our unending quest to be more human. So I don't think this one is different. I view the AI development as in basically two potential outcomes, both positive. One is AI does not, in fact, develop true separate consciousness. It's just a way to amplify our ability to think, to capture subjectivities. And that will be a net benefit to us because will allow us to think harder, think deeper, think more. The other is AI becomes a separate consciousness, and we will have discovered truly other minds by constructing them. I think that's incredible. I mean, I would love to understand how a different kind of consciousness understands the universe. I think it will be incredibly beneficial for me to see that. And that's also a net benefit. So, bottom line is, I really don't see a universe in which it's a horrible thing. You asked me, what evidence do I see? The evidence I see is the sense of magic I feel when I play with AI, right? I think all of us feel it. You go and work with AI and you ask a question, you get back an answer, and you see this illusion of subjectivity. You sort of ask it to critique what you've done. You say, here's a little poem I wrote. Tell me all the ways in which it's horrible. Or you say, this is a poem I found. Tell me all the ways in which it's horrible. And the AI tells you something. And sometimes you see its critique and you're like, that's actually good. That's a good critique. I do see myself as having done something not great there. I do see ways in which this thing can be improved. Those are moments of magic, moments where you're like, for the first time, here's a machine that can offer criticism that I actually think is possibly valid. Here's a machine that I can show something to, and it will tell me the ways in which I'm inadequate, that I'm bad, that I can be better. And the fact that so many people have had similar experiences with AI, this is magical. This is something that's meaningful. We can't just say this is nothing. There is something here. Just because right now we have not found a way to do these things in a way that is genuinely interesting for so many people. The fact that there are thousands of videos out there where people are taking delight in trying to write a novel with AI, I see that as a sign of hope. I think it means that people are interested in being more human with the help of a machine. I think people are interested in exploring their own potential with these machines. I don't see it as a purely negative thing. I think all of these things are evidence to me that there is fundamentally something interesting here. We just have to keep on experimenting and finding out what it is. And of course, we do have to keep on pushing to build more ethical machines. But that does not mean that the machines themselves, qua machines, are somehow inherently bad. There is a way in which we can do something wonderful with this technology.
But it would almost have been interesting to invite someone that has thought as deeply about AI as you, that disagrees with you, because I almost feel like, after this conversation we've had, I need to just think about a lot of the things you said for a week or so, because a lot of new ideas for me. So thanks for sharing those. I think just my last question is then just like, practically speaking, as you talked a lot about, the potential benefits, but practically speaking, how do you think creatives, or maybe in my case, the book community, should approach AI going forward? Then, should we then start embracing it, or should we boycott it, or is there something in between that you think would be best?
I think the rule of thumb is, if you're interested in exploring with or experimenting with AI, think about, what are you really doing? Are you using AI in a way that makes you feel more human or less? I think it's actually a fairly good yardstick to measure, right? So, you know, I don't presume to be able to speak for you, but I can sort of speak to you as an author, right? As a fellow author, because you do write. So as a fellow author, I would say that as a writer, if you use AI to draft for you, it's almost always a bad idea, because I just don't see how that can make you feel more human. I don't see it. Um, there are writers who claim to be able to write novels with AI, but that to me always sort of seems similar to the claims of writers who, write with the benefit of co-writers. I come up with an outline, and my co-writer writes it. That just to me isn't writing. I'm sorry, I just don't see that as writing. I don't see that as creatively legitimate. That's just my view. So I feel like if that's what you're doing with AI, it's just not creatively interesting, and it's not making you more human. On the other hand, right, if you're using AI in interesting ways, such as you're saying, I have an idea for, I want to write this essay. I'm going to ask AI to tell me how a machine would write it. And the machine generates an outline for an essay. And you look at it and you say, now I know what not to do, because these are all the cliched ways to do it. So I'm going to avoid all of these. That to me is more interesting. That to me is more like a use of AI, where you're sort of using AI to critique your tendency towards cliches, to sort of helping you be more human by pushing you to work harder. That I think is interesting. Bottom line, if you are using AI in ways that push you to work harder, to think harder, I think that's good. But otherwise, no. I mean, I use AI sometimes to help me understand things. I just read something and I say, okay, I just read this complicated thing. Do you know it? And then AI sometimes says, okay, I know it. So I say, okay, so I'm gonna now explain things to you, and you tell me if this explanation makes sense. And I'll type in explanation. And I say, this is what I think this proof is about. I think this is what I've worked out. What do you think? And often the AI will point out to me something wrong, and I'll be like, okay, do you have a source for that? Do you have a textbook or something that you can point me to, so I can read this and understand why I got wrong? And then the AI gives me a source, if it doesn't hallucinate one, because that's always a problem you have to worry about. And then I look at it and I examine and I sort of think harder, and I come back and I say, okay, I have a new explanation. Let me give it to you and tell me what you think. So I think any effort to use AI, you need to sort of think about it. Am I using AI in a way that makes me feel more human? Or am I using a way that makes me feel less human? Now, sometimes AI can be great for doing things that are tedious. Like, my agent was asking me to generate a list of all the publication dates for every story in my new collection. I just pointed the AI to my webpage where I listed this stuff and told it to extract that information, generate a list. That saved me a huge amount of time. And if I were doing that myself, I would feel more like a machine. Now the machine has saved me from doing that, so I feel more like a human. So that's an example where I feel like I used AI in a way that made me feel more human. But if I were ever to use AI to draft something that I wanted to write myself, I would feel less human. So to me, that's just a fairly easy way to sort of think about it. Um, if I'm trying to, I keep on talking about the potential of AI. So I do a lot of experiments. I think a lot about whether it's possible to tell a story by having readers interact with an AI. So, for example, right, if I want to write a thriller like All That We See or Seen, but I don't want to write it as a novel. I want to create it in a different way. I want to craft person, say a person who is a mysterious investigator, and the each reader will interact with this mysterious investigator and ask them questions to find out what happened to Julia. And the AI, that I crafted would then answer those questions. Is it possible for me to craft an AI in such a way that the entire story is told just by you interacting with the investigator? How do I make the investigator interesting so that you want to keep on talking to them? And so every person's experience of the story will be different depending on the questions you ask the investigator and what sort of follow-up questions you ask. But that to me is interesting, right? This is an experimental kind of artwork. This is something new that I'm trying to craft that is very difficult to do, but I'm intrigued by the possibility of crafting an artwork that is all synthetic subjectivities that interactors, readers, players interact with and get the art by talking to it, and everybody would have a different experience. That to me is interesting. So it's that kind of thing where you're experimenting with AI and trying to use it in a way that really pushes yourself, makes you feel more human. That to me is interesting, not the other way around.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think we'll conclude the interview there. But everyone go out and check out All That We See or Seem by Ken Liu. It's out now. And yeah, thank you so much, Ken.
Thanks, Johan. That was really fun.